versus the state. With me to weigh in on it, attorney Bar-Yoshafat. He's deputy director for the Kohelet Policy Forum and author of I Came to Celebrate Shabbat. And Shai Evan, chairman of Israel Hofshit, or Free Israel. Gentlemen, thanks very much for weighing in.
Sure.
All right, so Shai, I want to start with you. What's your reaction to the High Court decision, and in terms of who should make the call on what opens and what doesn't on Saturday?
Well, we're very happy about the decision that the Supreme Court made, but it shouldn't have gotten there, because the decision should have made in the municipality of Tel Aviv. They're supposed to be the ones who are in charge in the city and the city's life, and they're supposed to be the ones who make the decision what will be open and not closed, and not the government. The Supreme Court had no other option than to make that decision. But I would like to see more cities making their own decisions about the life of secular religion, about the public sphere in the city.
What do you think, Ron? Should the High Court be weighing in?
Well, actually, in this case specifically, I happen to agree with Shai. I think that the Supreme Court had no other choice. For Tel Aviv in general, I'm not so much happy with the Supreme Court interfering with religion and state. I think it's for the people, but in this case, the Supreme Court actually did not interfere and let what the people decided to go through.
Do you agree with the decision?
I believe that the people need to make their own minds. What I do have a problem is that I don't think that if a people choose to have a certain characteristic, religious, nationalistic culture, I don't think it makes it any less free or democratic. You also have a question in the States, which is the country of separation of church and state. Should you be able to sell cars in Montana on a Sunday because it's the day of church? So if the people also choose to see themselves differently, I think it's also okay.
Is it actually a choice of the people, though? Because we're talking about a government, an Israeli government and lawmakers that is right-wing and that has a substantial base of Orthodox within it.
And they're going to fight this decision. They already told the Prime Minister, they already wrote a letter to the Prime Minister, and they're preparing for a new battle about this. I will think eventually nothing will happen. Everything will stay the same, because this is happening in Tel Aviv for decades, and it's increasing. But this is a very problematic issue, because in a lot of other cities outside of Tel Aviv, there are places open on Shabbat, and they're working illegal. Also in Jerusalem, they're open on Shabbat, and they're open illegal because the municipal laws are not ordered, and the government will not allow them to do that. So we have to get an agreement that will allow the local governments to make their own decisions, and to find for secular people places that are open on Shabbat. And religious area, places are closed, and that's okay.
In terms of the people making the call, there's a substantial Arab population in Israel. Certainly their voice is not being heard in that call, if it should be open or not, is it?
Yeah, well, first of all, also here I agree with Shai. However, I do want to raise a point, which will answer your question maybe. I believe in competition, but I also believe in free and fair competition. And once you're open for Shabbat, you're making it extremely difficult for people who are observing the Sabbath. So either as employees or as owners of small businesses, it's going to be almost impossible for them to compete. In places that are mainly the Arab population, I don't really see that as a problem, because they're open whenever they want to be open. There is a problem that we both agree that the law needs to be coherent with reality.
Whose decision should it be, really? And just how critical is this to the definition of Israel as a country? Let's get a brief answer, and then we're going to come back.
Well, I think Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people. Just like I like having Hebrew as the national language and the Hebrew calendar, I also think that some of its characteristics are somewhat religious or nationalistic religious, and I think that's up for the people to decide, and whatever the people will choose, that will be fine by me.
I'm going to let you answer in just a moment. It's a contentious issue, and it's really about the identity of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state. Stay with us. We'll be right back here on Debrief. Back here on Debrief, continuing the conversation, a controversial issue of religion versus the state, a decision by Israel's High Court to allow certain grocery and convenience stores to be open on the Jewish Sabbath, and that's actually a really big deal in this part of the world. Here, continuing that conversation with me, attorney Bar-Yoshafat, deputy director of the Kohelet Policy Forum, and Shai Evan, chairman of Free Israel. Shai, before the break, we heard from Ron about his stance on why it should be this way for a Jewish and democratic state, why businesses should stay closed. What's your take?
Well, we believe that Israel should be democratic and religion, but we don't believe that religion is an ultra-Orthodox Jewish religion. There's Reform, there's conservative, there's secular Jews like me who believe in a different way to be Jewish. So if we want to have a pluralistic Jewish state, we can have places open on Shabbat, we can have public transportation on Shabbat, we can have a mix of open and closed by the will of the people and not by the will of the ultra-Orthodox.
That's a really important point you bring up, is transportation, because it's one thing to talk about grocery stores in certain cities, but there has been a continuing debate about all kinds of elements of society, including transportation. Why should a secular majority not be allowed a bus to get where they need to go on a Saturday?
Great question. So first of all, just to be more accurate, I'm not opposing opening the stores on Shabbat. It depends on the people. But if you're trying not to have more individual freedoms, which I fully support, if you're saying I want to have a different set of values and I want you to subsidize it, then that's not freedom, that's socialism. I would say have private transportation throughout the week. I'm not sure why I need to pay for someone else's will to drive on Shabbat. Or if you want to encourage another religion, then do it on your own time, not on my expense. That'll be more individual freedom.
Could you argue, though, that people are owed public transportation?
Well, of course, because there is public transportation. If we want to cancel it completely, that's a whole different matter. It's an economical issue. But once we have public transportation, buses and trains, it should be operating when people need it. If it's at nighttime, if it's at weekend, it's a safety issue, it's a social issue. People need to get from place to place. It's an environmental issue, but it doesn't happen not because of all of these issues. It doesn't happen because of the connection between state and religion, because of the ultra-Orthodox. And we're building now in Tel Aviv the new underground, the light rail. It should be open on Shabbat when it will open. If it's not, it will never work.
We started the segment by going back to 1947 to the sort of agreement that laid out the status quo. The difference, though, between the power of the ultra-Orthodox in Israel back then and now is very different and arguably much greater. The core issue here is a lot of how much the ultra-Orthodox actually controls the law, controls how people live. Do you think that that has perhaps gotten out of hand?
Well, I think if you look at Israeli society, you have about 25% that are religious, ultra-Orthodox and modern Orthodox, about 30% that are traditional, and maybe 10% who are secular, but like the Jewish tradition. That's a big chunk. That's more than, that's a majority. So I'm not sure that everyone that's secular necessarily doesn't care for the Jewish characteristics. Also, I'm not sure that everyone who's religious is necessarily for government intervention in the religion aspect. So I'm not sure that I can tell you that is I think that for most Israelis, it's just not on their top priority. Otherwise, theoretically, in the Israeli parliament, in the Knesset, you can change the situation tomorrow.
Should the religious have the right to dictate terms for the lifestyle of the secular?
Well, nobody should have the right to dictate to anyone else. We do not, as secular people, do not want to dictate to the ultra-Orthodox how they should live. We need to find balances. The problem is that the ultra-Orthodox public is voting for ultra-Orthodox parties, and it's looking after the interests. And secular people voting for many different parties in Israel, but they do not care about the interests of the secular population in Israel. And this is a big problem. We don't have a real representation in the Israeli parliament.
Do you think that divide is getting deeper? What are the implications, looking beyond grocery stores and transportation and that sort of surface issue? Is the divide between secular and religious getting deeper in Israel?
I actually think the other way around. I think if we look at the model of democracy, which means you need to see what the people want, you have more and more people who are more observant in Israel. So to say they've grown by numbers and that's why they have more political power, I can like it or not like it, but that is democracy. It's about, the checks and balances and the give and take. And the more religious Israel is becoming by its population, it only makes sense that it will be more religious by its characteristics.
Right, but does that alongside deepen the divide with the secular population?
Yes, of course. We see it in local struggles in many different cities. We see it now in Tel Aviv. We see it on national issues about the rights of the rabbinical court. We see it all over. There are always problems because this interference, this connection between state and religion is just wrong. We should separate between state and religion, allow the ultra-Orthodox or other form of Judaism to work on their own way, but not to combine it with Israeli politics and with the Israeli state.
Is there any realistic chance of that happening, do you think?
I hope so.
Given who's making the decisions, do you think?
I just don't see how someone can talk about politics and not put religion in it. Israelis look at the Scandinavian model as someone that they admire. 80% of the citizens are members of the Church of the State. So it intertwines, and I think it's fine, and it doesn't make a country less democratic or less free. But we do agree on the fact that it needs to be coherent. I'm not so sure that we understand what it means, church and state.
Right.
I just don't want to fund stuff. People can do whatever they want. They just don't want to be the
One
person
thing is definitely clear, as you say, religion and politics cannot be separated in this part of the world. Shai, Ran, thanks very much for weighing in.